Welcome to Media Melanie Talks TV. I'm Melanie, and today I'm back to talk about School Spirit Season 2 on Paramount+. First of all, I just want to say thank you to all of the School Spirits fans who've stuck with me during this season. It has been an absolute blast talking about this show. There is nothing like a mystery that just keeps on giving, the supernatural elements of it all, the love story. I mean, after this episode, it's a love story, baby, just say yes. Come on. I mean, what could have been better than the Wally and Maddie pool scene? Let me tell you, it was them getting it on here. The pancakes, Wally directly asking Maddie to stay forever, all while simultaneously having the most direct nods to the movie Ghost I've ever seen with the Charlie and Yuri pottery wheel scene. This episode, you guys, I am so sad that we only have one left, and like everybody, I am waiting on the edge of my seat, refreshing Google, hoping we get our Season 3 renewal news very soon, so that way we can keep talking about this series even when Season 2 is over. Speaking of Season 2 being over, what are we going to get in the finale? We got quite a bit of answers here, which is absolutely fantastic, but how is the body swapping going to work? Are Maddie and Mr. Anderson going to be able to get their bodies back? What is the end game for our ghost friends in general? Are they ever going to cross over? Are they going to be stuck at Split River High School forever? Now that we know trauma is energy, and as I've been saying, there could be a link to Split River and some sort of spiritual, supernatural energy, whether or not it is built on maybe sacred land that allows this energy to transpire and be stored here, or what? I'm not sure. However, I do think we can get at least another season from these stories. I don't think they can wrap up everything in one more episode. They haven't said the series is ending. Let us all manifest, have a little school spirit seance moment. Season 3, repeat after me, Season 3. All right, hopefully we're gonna get that news soon. I'm gonna read this episode description really quick before we get into it. Janet resorts to violence to escape Mr. Martin, then demands Simon take her back to the school. She finally provides answers to the ghosts about her work with Mr. Martin. Well, he uses Mr. Anderson's body to terrorize the living kids. Whew. Top to bottom, this episode was just fantastic. And again, I just can't believe the season is going to be over. Before we get more into my reaction and review of this penultimate episode, please be sure to hit that like button, go ahead and subscribe, and be sure you stick around for the end of the video because I will start asking some questions, making some finale predictions, and trying to put some pieces together to see exactly what sort of closure that we may or may not get in the finale. And remember, I will also have a theory video coming out and then a finale preview video as well. 3 videos a week on School Spirits? Yes, please. Let's start with the cabin scenario. In my preview videos each week, I've been going over some of the unboxing clues. I've been watching Kristen Maldonado from Pop Culture Planet's unboxing videos every week. They are super cute. And this week's box had an oar in it. And we have seen this scene of the oar in various trailers and teasers with Janet swinging it. I thought it was going to be in last week's episode and she was actually going to attack Simon. However, it happened in the boat this week. She and Mr. Martin were out there on the boat in the middle of this lake. Yes, she attacked him. She hit Mr. Anderson's body, inhabited by Mr. Martin, into the water. And as we saw later, the body's not looking very good. Is it possible that she actually killed Mr. Anderson's body and Mr. Martin's spirit is the only thing actually keeping it alive? The way that Janet, when she got back to the school and said, oh, I killed Mr. Martin maybe twice, is it possible that Mr. Anderson's body will not make it out of this and we will only have maybe one successful body swap here this season? I am a little bit worried for our friend Mr. Anderson and not really sure he's going to make it out. So we will see. Of course, the way things ended, he is headed back to Split River High School now. What is going to happen when he gets there? And this episode did pick up where the last one left off. We had Janet and Mr. Martin out there on the dock in the back. So we pick up with Simon, Nicole, and Xavier trying to go and search for Janet and try to figure out what happened to her. And seriously, last week I was pretty hard on Simon, thinking he ruined everything for her by letting Janet's body get away. And now at least we know that that is not the case. I mean, Simon is always working in Maddie's best interest. And I mean, I will get into the scene that we had between them later in this episode, but man, poor Simon, he has been through so much. All he wants to do is help his friend get her body back. And I'm just not sure we're going to get there. What do you guys think? Do we think that there will be a successful body swap? And Simon is in quite an emotional state right now. Is it possible that him being in a vulnerable emotional state could potentially play into something? Is he opening himself up to potentially get body snatched by another one of these ghosts? Now, I'm not sure which ghost would do that. Everybody seems to be on the same side. Could one of the big twists or reveals be that there's a whole nother ghost that's going to end up possessing Simon? Am I getting carried away? Potentially. And one more thing about Simon in terms of his vulnerable state, why did they focus in on that taser in the car? Who is he going to use that taser on? How is it going to come into play? It was not accidental that they showed that taser there, and I'm wondering, is he going to have to use it on Mr. Anderson or Mr. Martin? And will a taser even work? Like, let's say the body is actually dead and it's the spirit that's keeping the body fueled. Would it, in that case, work? I'm curious to see what Simon's going to do with this taser. Let's get back to what transpired at the cabin. Claire finally had filled Diego in on what happened. Eventually, Xavier gets grabbed, tied up in a boat by Mr. Anderson. Came out of that lake looking kind of like Swamp Thing. I mean, with the blood, with the mud, all of that stuff. They're able to get Xavier back. So Mr. Anderson is on the way to Split River High School. The teens are finding a way to get there, and they are finally able to actually call and warn Simon that he's on the way. And now that all the ghosts know basically what Mr. Martin's been up to, and in fact, Mr. Martin is kind of the bad guy of it all, I don't think that reception is going to be very good at all. So hopefully they have some kind of plan in place to deal with Mr. Martin in Mr. Anderson's body, because so far, it hasn't been going very well. And just circling back quickly to the conversation that Mr. Martin and Janet had in that boat, there were some pretty interesting comments that Mr. Martin did make, including talking about the difference they can make in the world. They deserve this. But the one that really got me was when Mr. Martin said, we needed more time, or we need more time. Hello, that is exactly what that ghostly apparition said in the scar, which now we know is Mr. Martin's scar. They did have a perceived shared key of this wristwatch, but now it seems like Mr. Martin is actually Janet's key, and the scar Maddie was going into was in fact Mr. Martin's scar. That is something I did say in the last video, because again, why else would we have heard all of these things about Janet's accomplishments, and why else would we have had this woman in there who now I am more convinced than ever is in fact Alice, and she's reiterating this statement that we heard Mr. Martin say from his own mouth of we need more time. I am convinced this is his fiance. Who else could it be? Why else would she be sharing this same sentiment of we need more time based on what Mr. Martin said in that boat to Janet? And now we know that burned face apparition is, I'm going to say 99% Janet. And the reason why she is in there haunting this scar is because it's not her scar. It is Mr. Martin's. That turned things on its head, and I can kind of see it now, you know? And it does make sense, of course. Why else would Maddie have been seeing all of those things? And I'm just still a little bit up in the air on the whole wristwatch of it all. I don't know. Are we going to learn more about this scar and the keys potentially? We learned that trauma is energy. That was another clue in the clue box this week. It was a hat that said trauma is energy. And something I've been saying is the fact that maybe Split River is built on some sort of sacred ground or has some kind of spiritual, supernatural energy about it. In the letter that we saw in that scar from Quinn, it outright said that trauma is energy, and Janet wrote down that she found a casual relationship between the school itself and this trauma energy. What does it mean? Is there a metaphysical aspect to this above and beyond just these specific ghosts being trapped at Split River High School? What do you think? And another comment that Mr. Martin made in the boat was the fact he said it's not about crossing over anymore, and then even said something like, you don't even know where you'd be crossing over to. Mr. Martin, are you insinuating that our girl Janet is going to hell? She did admit that she started the fire, be it accidentally, but something about this big battiness of Mr. Martin, and now that we know he was locking Janet in her actual scars. And can we talk about the fact as well that Mr. Martin compares them to Jonas Salk? I mean, yeah, they're doing some important scientific work here, but the way that he exercises his power, control, and tries to sway Janet to do things she doesn't necessarily want to do, for everyone who's been saying Mr. Martin's been the bad guy this entire time, you were right. I thought maybe it was more of a shared responsibility, or maybe there would be another third party that came to light, but as of right now, it seems like Mr. Martin is like the worst guy in all of Split River for decades. Okay, maybe not as bad as Mr. Manfredo, but maybe because we still haven't confirmed he's not responsible for some of these other ghost deaths. Going back to my Mr. Martin is an afterlife serial killer theory, which has not been disproven yet. Do we even believe that Janet actually started the fire? Something interesting is that when they started showing the flashbacks when Janet was sitting down and talking about everything, they didn't show an actual flashback of her death. They did show the 5 years where they were working together on these experiments before Rhonda showed up. But isn't it odd that they wouldn't have flashed back and shown us her death like we saw with Rhonda, with Charlie? So there's still some loose ends that I'm just not fully convinced about. Janet is just not giving bad guy vibes. She was, in fact, trying to protect her afterlife ghost crew. Mr. Martin, on the other hand, selfish guy, nefarious purposes, doing experiments, mad scientist. Do not trust a word this man/ghost says. And speaking of him being a ghost, how crazy was it when the janitor walked in and saw Mr. Martin, which now makes sense as to why the janitor said something about the school having scars as well. Did he just keep that information to himself? And I'm curious, like, can the janitor see ghosts in other places? Let's say he has a family member at the hospital. Can he see ghosts there? Or was it just the fact that the veil was in fact thinner now that we have this correlation between energy and trauma and whatnot? Dawn was even smart enough to pick up on it, right? She paid attention more than expected. As she told Janet, she saw her going into that scar, and Dawn went into her own scar herself. We also learned about the marigolds and the fact that Dawn's mom once told her, close your eyes and picture a field of flowers, and Dawn always pictured marigolds. So perhaps the key to crossing over, like we've been talking about, is resolving your trauma, coming to terms with things. Capturing a memory from a loved one who told you to kind of meditate and put your mind in this place. Having that mindset and that meditative state obviously helped that door appear for Dawn and cross over. The fact that Mr. Martin even questioned our girl Janet not being sure where she'd be crossing over to, I didn't like that. I thought it came across in a very evil type of way. And that is what is making me not even believe exactly what Mr. Martin's saying. We know Mr. Martin lied about the way Janet died, even the timing of it when Rhonda showed up. Who's to believe there's any truth in what he said about the nature of Janet's death in the first place? Until they show us a flashback of Janet and Mr. Martin dying, I am still on the team that I'm not sure Janet actually started the fire, and there's more trauma for her to uncover before she can even move on. So she may not even be aware there's more trauma buried beneath all of this in 66 years worth of lies, having spent all of this time with the guy who's in it for the science of it all, and who does seem to like Janet, and it may not be in a romantic type of way, but if that is his fiancée Alice haunting him in the scar, then she does feel like she was robbed and did need more time with Mr. Martin, and Janet essentially took that away from her. So I'm still not ruling out the fact that Alice could have started that fire, and it would make sense as to why she is haunting Mr. Martin's scar. Moving into the Split River High School storylines here, as I previously mentioned, that scene with Wally and Maddie, it makes sense why we saw that pancake mix in this week's Clue Box, of course, as well. But even just the cinematography of this scene, At first, I did think this was going to be taking place in a Scar or a Red Room because of all the red lighting, but now we know that Wally was actually playing this slideshow of worldly locations there, and Maddie made a comment that it was kind of sad. He never got to go to any of those places. He went to Minnesota for an away game once, literally heartbreaking. When Wally says, "I'm here, I'm there with you now," my heart melted. I had goosebumps the entire time, very similar to that pool scene. And then to double down and have the Yuri and Charlie showing at the same time, it is truly an afterlife love story here. I'll make pancakes for you when the sun comes up. I'll make pancakes for you every morning. And the playfulness of, Maddie saying, "Can I have blueberries in my pancakes in this world?" Every single thing about this scene, this and the pool scene, I mean, again, it's hard to root for Maddie and Wally being together because we want Maddie to get her body back. But at the same time, this is the definition of soulmates. It's potentially a very tragic love story, but were they meant to be together this entire time? Were their souls destined to be here together at Split River High School? If Maddie does move on, could this potentially give Wally the closure, the love, the push that he potentially needs to cross over? As of right now, if we're looking at the potential for any of these ghosts to cross over, after this episode, I mean, I do think Wally has a pretty strong chance, but also something about Rhonda and Quinn and Charlie as well. I mean, is it possible we see all of the ghosts actually moving on? I doubt it, especially if we're getting a season 3, but out of all of the ghosts, if you had an inkling that one of them could be crossing over this season, who would it be? Drop it in the comments and let me know. And circling back to something at the end of the episode, when Yuri and Wally are having a conversation and Yuri says to Wally, do you really want to be the reason why Maddie stays here? That hit pretty hard. And I do think Wally's going to have the realization that if he really does love Maddie, he's going to have to do the right thing and encourage her to move on if, in fact, that is how it plays out. So I am very curious to see if Maddie does get her body back, what do those final moments with her and Wally together look like? And have they established a strong enough connection to where if Maddie returns to Split River High School, maybe she'll be able to see Wally again? And maybe that's kind of the middle ground and silver lining in all of it. I'm not sure. Because seeing Simon and how distraught he is about not having Maddie breaks my heart in such a different way. No matter what happens, somebody's going to get hurt here. So I hate to pick and choose, and I just don't know at this point who it's going to be. So the reason we started even getting answers in this episode is our girl Quinn. She, in fact, did find her key. She found that little field marker with the devil on it, which is interesting because that was something that was also found in this week's clue box. Very smart marketing by Paramount Plus, by the way. Absolutely love those unboxing videos by Kristen. But in finding her key, she was able to revisit her scar and the horrific trauma of the bus accident. Within that scar, she found the missing page to Janet's notebook. And that was very interesting. It talked about the fact that trauma is energy. It talked about biochemical reactions and the fact that there is a causal relationship and correlation between the energy and the school. For everyone that's been telling me I'm insane for thinking that Split River could be either a portal to hell or, again, built on a sacred ground or just has some special metaphysical energy, I mean, I'm not wrong, technically. If Janet did in fact uncover there is a relationship, what does the energy have to do with the geographic location? Is it the town as a whole? I mean, it is named Split River. That's another theme we've been talking about regarding the river Styx and the delineation between the living and the dead and what's in between. So what exactly is this correlation? We don't know quite yet, but the fact that they are surmising that if every single ghost takes their key, goes into their scar at the same time, it could potentially generate enough energy for at least Mr. Martin and Janet to leave the school and get past that electromagnetic fence. And just to read a little bit of the dialogue from those actual scenes regarding trauma is energy, going into the rooms creates energetic circles, a fence around the school, an electromagnetic barrier. If one enters a room and activates the energy, one activates all at the same time, creating power. It can overwhelm the system and they could potentially get beyond the fence. And then Mr. Martin talks about getting them all in there at once. And Janet doesn't want to do that. She is actually not the bad guy in this. In fact, she sacrifices herself when Mr. Martin starts putting her in there by force, making her stay in there for longer and more often. We learned that the tick marks on the fallout shelter wall were not necessarily how many days Janet was there, but how many times Mr. Martin forced her to enter her scar and relive her trauma. Bad guy. He tells her they can get back to their families, and Janet's like, yeah, but they can't see us. And he said, well, we can see them. And if that's Mr. Martin's endgame, he just wants to get back out so he can sit around a Christmas dinner table with Alice and his family. They can't see him. That's enough for Mr. Martin. Like, that's what you want to do instead of crossing over and potentially finding peace. At this point, Mr. Martin being such a bad guy, he's the one that's worried about where he would be crossing over to because he knows his actions not great. Even if Janet did start the fire and kill him, I am really hoping that we get those actual flashbacks and scenes to the fire itself to give us more closure on what actually happened instead of just taking Janet's word for it, because she is giving unreliable narrator. And a lot of that is because from the beginning, Mr. Martin forced her into these lies from the very second they were joined by Rhonda, the first ghost. And Mr. Martin said, yeah, Janet fell down a flight of stairs a couple years after I got here. He set the tone, he set the table for this lie, and she's essentially been forced to live with it. So what else is he forcing her to live with that she may not even be aware of? If you've got some ideas, drop them in the comments. Meanwhile, at the school, Simon finds his suspension letter, and we know by the end of the episode that he ends up calling back for his college interview, which he kind of tanked at the time. And Maddie said, I never told you to tank that. Simon's starting to realize he really put himself on the line for Maddie. Meanwhile, Maddie's here talking about Wally. Simon outright asks her, hey, is this all because of Wally? And you know what? It kind of is. It's also about the other ghosts as well. But like Simon said, what about your living and breathing friends? The common thread in this episode here is Simon and his mental state. And I am getting worried for our friend. He's got a taser. He's being faced with suspension. He's having regrets over his college interview. He's very emotionally distraught over the whole Maddie situation and the fact that they still haven't got her body and soul back in the right spot yet. So, I don't know. Things may not be looking very good for Simon. The crux of this episode, though, is the big face-off. When we have Peyton List playing two parts, Maddie and Janet looking at each other, saying hi and welcome back. I just want to shout out again the fact that Peyton has been doing an incredible job playing both characters. Jessica Bohr is also doing a phenomenal job as Janet, but also we've got Mr. Anderson playing two roles, Mr. Martin and Mr. Anderson. So I just want to shout out those actors for doing such a great job, really bringing the duality to both of these roles, the good and bad. They've both been just nailing it, especially Peyton List. And this scene, seeing her there talking to herself, that is everything. What's interesting too is that Janet and Maddie's body can actually see and hear the ghosts. So I find that to be interesting, which must mean that when Mr. Anderson does make his way back to the school, he should be able to see the ghosts as well. I'm interested to see how that communication goes. So in this sit down, when finally the ghosts join, we've got Maddie, we've got Janet. Janet does go to talk about exactly what happened. She said she started the fire, she killed Mr. Martin once, maybe twice, and that it was an accident. I'm still not sure Janet was the one to cause this accident until we actually see it with our own eyes. So to be determined if that is actually accurate. If it was an accident, though, why on earth would Mr. Martin have lied about her falling downstairs and them not arriving at the same time? Why not just own up to it and say it was an accident and we both died? Something is not making sense, and it's really bothering me. We saw that first 5 years of them together at the high school when they were by themselves, it was kind of like a honeymoon phase. They were working together, staying busy, working on their experiments, and then one day the lights flicker And Rhonda shows up. That's when it clicked for Janet that Rhonda had that item. She had the acceptance letter. Janet went and held on to it, of course, and then realized later that each one of the ghosts had an item with them when they died. So that's how they started collecting these keys and realized that was how they entered these spaces or scars that they did discover during those first 5 years. That moment when Rhonda died, though, and Mr. Martin says, "Hey, I'm sorry, you're dead. Welcome to the Split River afterlife." The look on Rhonda's face in that moment, my goodness, the devastation of that initial reaction, that really hit me hard. Rhonda, the actress who plays Rhonda, Sarah Yarkin, is incredibly talented. It's amazing how sometimes a look can speak 1,000 words, and this is one of them. Throughout the conversation, we are assuming that Mr. Martin's watch is in fact a shared key between them both, but Yuri ends up coming up with, hey, what if Janet's key is a person? And could it be Mr. Martin? Again, this goes back to the fact that the watch was being used to enter Mr. Martin's scar, not Janet. So what does Janet's scar look like? I do hope we get to see Janet's actual scar from her perspective versus Mr. Martin's scar. Because what's in there? I mean, is her dad going to be in the scar? Is Mr. Martin haunting Janet's scar? I mean, I am dying to know. Furthermore, we learn that the Afterlife Support Group is more of a control group in a scientific experiment. And really, Mr. Martin has had his eye on the prize this entire time. And really, Janet's kind of been an innocent bystander in all of this, becoming a lackey of Mr. Martin in the afterlife. That is maybe one of the biggest tragedies of all, because Janet just keeps getting pushed down by these men when she had so much life ahead of her and was so capable. She was robbed of all of these achievements. Yuri even asks Janet at one point, why did you keep this a secret? And like Janet said, we couldn't say anything because once people know that they're being studied, their behavior changes, which of course Yuri cites as the Hawthorne effect. He knows a lot of stuff. Obviously, he's done a lot of reading over the years. And again, I did say at one point, maybe Yuri is sus, but I think he's just a super smart guy who is riddled with anxiety in his real life and really doesn't have any bad intentions. I do love me some Churi. And did anyone else find it interesting that Mr. Martin promised to get Janet out? Why else would he have such a vested interest in getting her out? It seems like a lot of this has selfishly to do with him wanting to get out and get back to Alice. But could it be that he promised Janet he'd get her out because he does, in fact, feel guilty about something? Maybe Mr. Martin accidentally caused the fire and it wasn't Janet, and he's been lying about it the entire time. We did not get to see within Mr. Martin's scar exactly how the fire was started. So if there's one thing I am really hoping for in the finale, it's that we do get to see the actual day of the fire from start to finish, how it happened, who started it. Wouldn't mind seeing Mr. Martin and Janet in the afterlife for the first time either, similar to how we just saw Rhonda. What really hurt though was when Janet basically told Maddie, hey, I needed out. I was not trying to hurt anybody. When all of that stuff happened, the veil was thinner, as we saw with the janitor. Very similar situation with Maddie. I believe Janet. I don't think she was trying to hurt anybody. It sounded like she needed to escape this literal hellscape of a prison that Mr. Martin has kept her in now for over a year. Having told the other ghost she crossed over all while he's using her for these experiments against her will. Are you even kidding me? And like Janet said, it was my burden. It was my idea. Janet was the best ghost friend of all because all she wanted was for her friends to not be negatively impacted or held prisoner in these hellscapes. It was all Mr. Martin the entire time, you guys. And then we talk about Mr. Martin's scar, and Janet's like, what woman are you talking about in there? I also wonder, did Janet ever meet Mr. Martin's fiance? On IMDb, it does say the actress who plays Alice that we saw as the ghostly apparition before will be back. So I imagine, do we get to meet actual living Alice in a flashback, or are we going to get another look inside Mr. Martin's scar with her haunting it? What do you guys think? And then really wrapping it up, this sort of mirroring, right? We have Janet saying she lost herself in this partnership and I never thought I'd lose myself to another person. That's when things kind of click for Simon and he goes back to try to set up another college interview. Simon's starting to realize, I've been doing everything for my friend Maddie, including getting suspended from school, blowing my college interview to try to help her and get her back. And meanwhile, Maddie's all worried about her ghost boyfriend? I mean, hey, I can see why Simon is not very happy about this. Simon's in an emotional state. Simon's got a taser. What is going to happen to Simon in the finale? And did anybody else notice when he and Janet were sitting at a stop sign in the car, it was all red in there like a scar. Could that be some kind of foreshadowing? Will Simon end up dying and becoming a ghost, or is his emotional state right now going to cause another ghost to inhabit him? Is it possible that Mr. Martin could jump from Mr. Anderson's body, because let's face it, it could potentially be dead, he does not look very good, and jump into Simon's body instead? Could that happen? At the end of this episode, we also saw Quinn going back to the band. She and Rhonda do have another emotional friendship type of moment, which really gives more credence to the fact that Rhonda is now actually helping another ghost as well. She's starting to come to terms with her scar. If we are going to get somebody crossing over in the final episode, again, I think it could be Rhonda. Rhonda, Wally, or Charlie, who do we think has the best chance of crossing over this season? Or do we think that maybe everybody can cross over, even Yuri included now, maybe even Quinn, because they've all been having these difficult conversations. They all seem to have a renewed sense of ghost self-awareness as to their traumas and learning more about themselves. So are we getting everybody moving on? Are we getting one or two moving on? What do you guys think? This episode ends with Mr. Anderson driving back to the school in Diego's car. The living teens are scrambling to get back there as well. We've got the ghosts and Maddie and Janet at the school. So let's get into some finale predictions, everybody. I want you to head straight down into the comments and write the top 3 things that you want to see in this finale. My number 1 thing is not necessarily in the finale, but season 3 renewal news. Number 1, please give us season 3 renewal news for School Spirits so we can all rest easy, at least in between seasons, and still have some stuff to talk about. But if we're talking about finale predictions, this episode I've talked a lot about who could potentially be crossing over. I've got to guess we're going to have at least one ghost crossover, if not more. Who do we think it is? Like I just said, Rhonda has really been coming to terms with her situation. She's visited her scar a number of times, and she gets to speak with Janet again and get more closure on their friendship and what they have lived through together for the past decades as well. Then we've got our new character, Yuri. I'd say he's least likely to move on because he is the newest and probably needs to spend more time here interacting with the ghosts and potentially visiting his scar as well. But we do know that now he's found Charlie and potentially love and romance. Is that enough in the afterlife to help you cross over? I mean, we could see that with Charlie. Charlie had quite an eye-opening episode in the last one with Wally's reunion and came to terms with the fact that he was his own biggest bully. He's already visited his scar. He's found love here in the afterlife. Could it be Charlie that moves on, and maybe that will then propel Yuri to cross over as well? Now, we haven't seen these exit doors in any of their scars yet, but we know that Janet closed her eyes and pictured a field of marigolds. So could Charlie close his eyes and picture himself on that pottery wheel with Yuri potentially, and that opens up his exit sign? And then there's Wally. I mean, Wally's had quite the journey this season, all culminating in this amazing love scene between he and Maddie. By the way, I loved seeing his buns. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. Here for Milo Manheim. But Wally's also visited his scar. He's starting to come to terms with things. He's found love in the afterlife and also accepted the fact that he was a bully. But, you know, he's managed to redeem himself somewhat in the afterlife. Better late than never, right? So could it be Wally who's crossing over? Could it be Quinn? She's gone through quite an arc this season as well, making friends with Rhonda, even helping Rhonda listen to that foolish girl song and get more closure on one of Rhonda's friendships she had back in the living world. And then, of course, we've got Janet and Mr. Martin. Could one of them cross over? If Maddie does get her body back and Janet's able to return her spirit to Split River High School, are we going to see the exit door open for Janet and she finally gets a happy ending? Now, if there's one person I don't want to see crossover unless they're crossing over into literal hell, it is Everett Martin. No, sir, I do not want your exit door to open, and if it does, I want it to go straight down. I want you to go burn where you deserve. How dare you treat our girl Janet like that and the rest of these ghosts? You were supposed to to be a trusted teacher, a role model, someone that these ghosts could find comfort in. And even though there aren't necessarily the same rules in the world of the afterlife as the living, I'm pretty sure that you still suck and you deserve to cross over to the bad place, Mr. Martin. Finale prediction. Who do we think is crossing over? Drop it in the comments. And could there potentially be another ghost coming? Simon, as I mentioned, is quite emotionally vulnerable right now, but at the same time, I can't keep my eye off of Xavier. Our boy had the flatline experience where he saw Mr. Nears in the hospital waiting room. The veil is obviously thinner for Xavier. Will that circle back and come into play? Could Xavier somehow end up as a ghost at Split River High School? If I'm guessing one of the living does turn into a ghost, I mean, it's got to be Xavier, potentially Simon, or Nicole. I'm going to say not Claire, but Nicole could be a good contender as well because she has the belief. She believes in the ghosts and the things that are happening. She's had quite an emotional season as well. So, I mean, maybe it could be Nicole. For some reason, I just don't see it being Claire. It would be pretty wild if it ended up being a secondary character like Diego, who they kind of just introduced here in the second season without any mention back in the first season. I don't think it's going to be Diego. Now, if we really want to get crazy and Mr. Martin's the new bad guy of it all, what if it's Sandra Nears? What if Sandra somehow returns to the school, ends up in a bad spot, and she ends up being the next ghost at Split River High School? Meanwhile, her husband's trapped at the hospital. I mean, maybe the next experiment will be how to merge these ghost worlds within the Split River community. And let's say something does happen to Mr. Martin, or he can't make his way back, or he does end up over in hell where he deserves. The ghost crew, if they don't cross over, they're going to need another adult figure. So could Sandra potentially be the next figure? And then Maddie will maybe be able to see her mom at Split River High School. And then she goes to the hospital to see her dad there. That would be pretty tragic for Maddie. So I don't wish that because obviously if Maddie does get her body back and she doesn't have parents, that is a big problem. And they've been saying this ending will be worse than what you think it is. Could Sandra being the next ghost and Maddie losing both of her parents be the worst thing? I think there's a pretty strong case for that. And the biggest finale prediction of all, will Maddie get her soul back? Will things go back to the way they were? Will Mr. Anderson get his body back? He's pretty happy there in the afterlife as a spirit, and his body itself as a physical vessel not looking very good right now. If someone's going to die, I'm putting money on Mr. Anderson because I don't know that his body could survive a soul swap. Let's say Mr. Martin's soul is the only thing fueling, keeping him alive. What happens when Mr. Anderson's spirit gets back in the body? Is his body going to collapse? Will he be the one that maybe ends up in the hospital or dead as kind of a go-between between Maddie and her dad, which would be really interesting given that he kind of has this interest in Sandra. Whew. And our girl Sandra, what is going to happen to her? The poor woman has been through so much. She can tell there's something off about Maddie, but obviously hasn't got to the mindset of, oh yeah, there's another spirit inhabiting her, because that's crazy, and why would she think that unless somebody told her? I want a happy ending for Sandra more than anything, which makes me really hope that Maddie does get her body back, make it back to her mom. There's nothing I'd rather see more than a loving moment between mother and daughter, but like an actual daughter, not a ghost of 1958 Janet. And really, too, what is going to happen with the fact that Xavier saw Maddie's dad? That hasn't come back into play yet. So I am really interested to see how everything ends up tying together. We've still got some stuff up in the air, and I still don't necessarily believe everything Janet told us here. She is an unreliable narrator, mostly because Mr. Martin has forced her to be and live under these lies for 66 years. Everybody, get down in the comments. Let me know what you think about the finale. And remember, I will be back with another theory video and a finale preview video. Be sure to hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and I do talk about other dark TV shows, including Severance on Apple TV+, Paradise on Hulu, and The White Lotus on HBO Max. If there are any shows coming up this year that you'd like to see me cover, drop it in the comments. I would be happy to take that into consideration. Really appreciate everybody being here. Thank you so much to the School Spirits community. I have just had a blast doing this, and I hope that you've enjoyed these videos as well. So we've got one episode left. Again, let's all hope for that season 3 news. School Spirit Seance, Season 3. Manifest Season 3, you guys. That is our #1 job before the finale. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again soon. Media Melanie, clicking off.